Obviously, we've got developments everywhere. Now, I'm not opposed to developments where natural growth requires housing developments. What I'm opposed to is a lack of infrastructure and withholding of funds from Section 106 funding. There's massively damaging infrastructure. It's damaging schools, dentists, GPs, highways, waterways and everything else you can think of for infrastructure in our district and county. What can we do to ensure that we're going into local government bodies with a clear head on how best to benefit the public in regards to housing developments?
Yeah, really good question. And there's no easy answer. I mean, I think the Conservative Party has to be a party of housing and house building, because we've got to get young people onto the housing ladder. But I completely understand that in some parts of the country, like Oxfordshire, the sheer number of homes that have been built have been immensely difficult for communities. And now you've got housing targets which are even higher than the last ones, and so it almost feels like an impossible situation. And, you know, having come to Oxfordshire many times over the years, I see it myself. I've seen communities change completely, and the way of life that you've known alter. So you've got to be sensitive to that. I think the three things that we as a party should do, other than being seen as the party of house building, one, we've got to think of ways of making sure the infrastructure follows the housing. When I was housing secretary, we began to create an infrastructure levy, for example. A bit of a technical thing, but the idea was that you could levy much more than just 106. So in areas of high land values, like most of Oxfordshire, you could get a proper amount of money, which you could then use for the roads, the GP surgeries, the parks, whatever you actually need. I also worked with the late great Sir Roger Scruton, the Conservative philosopher, to create the Building Better, Building Beautiful report, to say, well, if we are going to build, and in particular in places like this, where there's obviously a vernacular, a heritage, very, very beautiful and precious villages, let's try to build something better than we've had in our lifetime. Let's ask the Barretts and Persimmons to raise their game and build in the style of Oxfordshire or Cotswolds, whatever it might be, and create design codes. I think you should be pressing for that, because most of that is in law, and you have the ability to ask for developers to be building more beautifully than they have in the past. The biggest lesson I learned as housing secretary, where we tried with Boris to reform the planning system and to liberalise it, is that we should really be doing that in our big cities. We tried to do that across the whole country, which in a sense was the fairest thing to do. But actually what we really need to do is massively densify our big cities, so that you can protect the countryside, but still build the number of homes that we need. And I think there are huge opportunities to do that, because most of our cities are not dense at all. Look at most of London is actually a city where you could build far more homes. I come from the Midlands and the North, and the cities that I know are like Wolverhampton, Birmingham, Derby, Nottingham, Leicester. There's huge opportunities for regeneration, for building upwards. And in fact, they're crying out for new aspirational families to move in. Look, they're all bankrupt, these cities like Birmingham and Nottingham, with their appalling Labour councils. They need people there, working, paying their taxes, using the shops and the restaurants. So I think the next Conservative government should be one which massively liberalises planning, but in the cities, and gets building in those places, so that we can protect the countryside, the villages, the market towns for future generations. And then just the last point I'd say is that we will never fix the housing crisis unless we reduce the number of people coming into the country. Because 80 to 90% of the deficit of new homes that are needed in this country is because of people coming into the country. And so we could literally cover the whole of Oxfordshire in houses, and it probably still wouldn't be enough if you're having 1 million people come into the country every year, as we have in recent years under our watch. So you've got to bring that right down if we're ever going to get anywhere close to getting a grip of this problem. And I don't just mean to where Labour is probably going to get it to, which is 300,000 or 400,000 people a year, but right down to tens of thousands or net zero, right down, so we give people like you the chance to get on the housing ladder without wrecking our countryside.